Gerald the Great, are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?
I saw Goody Osborne with the devil. I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil. The devil's in this very room. Ah!
How did the Red Scare affect the New York theater community? Was there even a Broadway blacklist during the 1950s? There is an answer, but first, we need to set the stage and give you some historical context. After all, theater communities are always very small worlds, even on Broadway. In the early 20th century, a growing movement was developing in Greenwich Village, where theater companies were emerging with the goals of producing more intellectual and less commercial theater. In 1915, a group called the Washington Square Players was founded, and later evolved into the Theater Guild in 1919, opening their own space on 51st Street in 1925. The Theater Guild was renowned for bringing some of the world's most important theatrical works to the American stage, including 18 plays by George Bernard Shaw, such as the premiere of Heartbreak House in 1920, 7 Eugene O'Neill plays like Strange Interlude, Ah Wilderness, and The Iceman Cometh, and 2 of Rodgers and Hammerstein's most influential works, Oklahoma and Carousel. It was in December of 1929, though, that 3 Guild members, Cheryl Crawford, Harold Clurman, and Lee Strasberg, with permission of the Guild, produced Red Rust, the first Soviet play to be produced in the United States. With Red Rust a success, and wanting to branch out, Crawford, Clurman, and Strasberg left the Theater Guild to found the Group Theater. In the summer of 1931, they gathered a group of like-minded artists in Brookfield Center, Connecticut, and together they solidified what being a member of the group theater would entail. As with the Theater Guild, the group theater company was very much interested in ensemble-based, non-commercial, analytical theater. They also utilized the acting methods of Konstantin Stanislavski, Russian theater practitioner and teacher. Today, the Stanislavski method is Acting 101, as it stresses the importance of believability and realism, but it was the group theater who truly brought his methods to the mainstream. Many members of the group theater would go on to greater things in both Broadway and Hollywood, like Stella Adler, Sanford Meisner, Howard Da Silva, Elia Kazan, and Marc Blitzstein, just to name a few. Playwright Clifford Odets had 4 of his plays produced by the group theater, all in 1935, including Awake and Sing and Paradise Lost. While the company folded in 1941, it produced many notable acting teachers who became incredibly influential for generations of actors to come, like Adler, Strasberg, and Meisner. Your ears are long.
My ears are long.
Your ears are long.
My ears are long.
Your ears are long.
Your hair is long.
My hair is long.
Your hair is long.
My hair is long.
Your hair is long.
Your face is green.
My face is green.
Your face is green.
My face is green.
Your face is green.
My face is green.
Your face is green.
Your shirt is green.
My shirt is green.
Your shirt is green.
My shirt is green.
Your shirt is green.
We have one more major theater company to talk about here. During the height of the Great Depression in the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, was established by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt for the purpose of providing state-sanctioned jobs to multitudes of unemployed Americans, and that included the artistic community. Hallie Flanagan was brought aboard to be the director of the Federal Theater Project, established August 29, 1935. Flanagan spearheaded the entire theater department at Vassar College, establishing the Vassar Experimental Theater, and was the first woman to be awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, enabling her to study theater in Europe for 14 months. With Flanagan at the helm, the Federal Theater Project employed thousands within a network of smaller theater units that would put on all manner of plays and musicals for the public at popular prices. It was an unprecedented effort, eventually sponsoring almost 1,200 productions for an audience of more than 30 million, 1/4 of the United States population. Right away, the FTP produced living newspaper shows, dramatizing current events and calling attention to the ills of society. Their full productions included plays like AAA Plowed Under, about farmers suffering through the era of the Dust Bowl, It Can't Happen Here, an alternate reality play where an FDR-type politician is defeated by a fear-mongering fascist, and Revolt of the Beavers, a children's show about a worker beaver leading a revolt against the chief beaver. These plays and numerous others were produced not only in New York City, but in countless local theater communities across the country. By June 1937, though, it seems the U.S. Congress had had enough of the Federal Theater Project. They may have been wary of the FTP advocating for socialism, or it may be as benign as budgeting. But on June 10th, the Federal Theater Project's payroll was cut by 30%, and on June 11th, it was announced that no new productions would open until after July 1st. It is here that we encounter the FTP's most famous creation, the labor opera, The Cradle Will Rock.
Oh, okay, sorry. Forgive me for sidetracking for a second, but we have to talk about The Cradle Will Rock. It is absolutely going to set the stage for what's going to come after.
Is there a baby in the cradle?
Metaphorical baby.
Metaphorical baby, eh?
Okay.
The New York unit of the FTP was Project 891, run by John Houseman and a 21-year-old Orson Welles. The two men selected Marc Blitzstein's The Cradle Will Rock as part of Project 891's next season. Blitzstein, also a member of the group theater, was inspired by the Marxist theater of Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill, and crafted a musical about union organizing in Steeltown, USA. The primary message of the piece was that only the solidarity of the unions can rock the cradle of capitalistic complacency.
Oh, when the wind blows, oh, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock.
With Orson Welles as director, Cradle prepped for a June 16th opening in 1937 at the Maxine Elliott Theater on 38th Street. More than 18,000 tickets had been sold when Project 891 received word on June 12th that the FTP's funding was cut. By June 15th, WPA guards locked up the theater, and with funding no longer coming from the government, Actors Equity, the theater actors union, stated that in order for the production to continue, Project 891 was on the hook to pay the actors, which was simply not possible.
Not coffee and Andy. Just coffee, Andy. Cute, huh?
The night of the June 16th opening, the cast waited in the Maxine Elliott until another space could be booked. At the last second, a theater near Central Park called the Venice was located. So Houseman and Welles mobilized the cast and audience to make the trek 21 blocks uptown to the new venue. By 9 p.m., the Venice was packed, and Welles announced that Blitzstein would perform the entire show on a rented piano because, as per Equity, the actors were forbidden to perform on the stage. But on the stage only. Blitzstein sang the opening number, and by the next song, cast member Olive Stanton rose her voice to sing. As the evening progressed, the majority of the cast played their parts amongst the audience, creating a once-in-a-lifetime event that is nothing short of Broadway legend. The Cradle Will Rock continued to play at the Venice for 2 weeks, then moved to Broadway for a 4-month run in early 1938. It was also in 1938 that House Democrat Martin Dies was named chairman of a new committee developed for the purpose of rooting out subversives and communists from the government. The Federal Theater Project was a perfect target for the Dies Committee, especially after Hazel Huffman, a WPA mail clerk who never worked for the FTP, was called to testify. Huffman proceeded to name numerous organizations, unions, and guilds that worked for or with the FTP, and all of which she painted with the brush of communism, including director Hallie Flanagan. Flanagan was called on December 6, 1938, and her testimony proves just how little the Dies Committee knew about theater, or even Flanagan herself, assuming that FTP productions like Revolt of the Beavers was communist propaganda, or obsessing over those 14 months she spent in Russia studying theater. Remember, Stanislavski's methods were revolutionizing stage acting. They're regularly employed by the group theater and other major theater practitioners in the 1930s. However, the ignorance of the committee and the unflappability of Flanagan is most exemplified by this iconic exchange.
You are quoting from Marlowe. Is he a communist?
Oh, I'm very sorry. I was quoting from Christopher Marlowe.
Tell us who Marlowe is so we can get the proper reference, because that is all we want to do.
put in the record that he was the greatest dramatist in the period of Shakespeare immediately preceding Shakespeare. Hallie Flanagan knew what was up, even when asked point blank.
Do you believe that theater is a weapon?
I believe that the theater is a great educational force. I think it is entertainment. I think it is excitement. I think it may be all things to all men. On June 30th, 1939, the Federal Theater Project came to an end. The Theater Guild, the Group Theater, and the Federal Theater Project produced works that led to a great 20th century renaissance of American theater. Many of the characters involved in these groups, though, would make the pilgrimage to Hollywood, only to find themselves returning to the New York stage a few years later, thanks to the efforts of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Now, there is no shortage of books and videos on the Hollywood blacklisting during the Cold War. However, it is worth mentioning for our purposes, as there are quite a few familiar faces from the New York theater scene. On October 20th, 1947, hearings began in Hollywood with the purpose of uncovering communist subversives and sympathizers. Stand-up gents like Richard Nixon sat on the panel and for 9 days questioned both friendly and unfriendly witnesses. Friendly witnesses included studio heads like Louis B. Mayer, Jack Warner, and Uncle Walt Disney. Oh, and president of the Screen Actors Guild, Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor?
The unfriendly witnesses were summoned for October 27th, which included 19 writers, directors, and actors. Of the 19 people called, 11 testified. Number 11 was Bertolt Brecht, who left the country after testifying. The others became known as the Hollywood 10. The 10 notoriously refused to answer on their First Amendment rights and were found in contempt of Congress and sentenced to jail. Many of their careers never recovered. Throughout the HUAC trials, labor unions were always seen as a breeding ground for communist ideologies. Perhaps in order to overcompensate, in 1947, the Motion Picture Association of America released a statement saying that they would not employ the Hollywood 10, communists, or, quote, a member of any party or group which advocates the overthrow of the government of the United States, end quote. And in 1951, the Screen Actors Guild, then headed by Ronald Reagan,
The actor?
imposed loyalty oaths on its members and joined forces with the studios in trying to purge the film industry of communists. Hollywood was firmly ensconced in the Red Scare, though, when Red Channels was issued on June 22, 1950. Red Channels was the official blacklist, naming 151 writers, directors, and performers considered to be subversives. Among those listed are some very familiar names that either were a part of or got their start in the New York theater community, including
Conductor and composer of West Side Story, Leonard Bernstein.
co-librettist of Guys and Dolls, Abe Burrows, playwright of both My Sister Eileen and Wonderful Town, Jerome Chodoroff, orchestral composer Aaron Copland, acting teacher Uta Hagen, librettist and lyricist of The Wizard of Oz, Yip Harburg, playwright Lillian Hellman, Tony and Academy Award-winning actor Judy Holliday, singer and movie star Lena Horne, poet and novelist Langston Hughes,
Actor and singing snowman, Burl Ives.
librettist of West Side Story and Gypsy, Arthur Laurence,
Burlesque entertainer and subject of the musical Gypsy, Gypsy Rose Lee.
actor and Rocky Balboa trainer Burgess Meredith, playwright Arthur Miller, actor and original Tevye, Zero Mostel,
Actor and chief Wiggum voice inspiration, Edward G. Robinson. Yeah, see?
and many more names already familiar to us from earlier in the video, like Stella Adler, Marc Blitzstein, Orson Welles, and Howard Da Silva. Oh, speaking of Da Silva, the man had some serious Broadway cred, originating the roles of Judd Fry in Oklahoma and Ben Franklin in 1776, as well as being part of that fabled original cast of The Cradle Will Rock. When the Hollywood hearings resumed in March 1951, Da Silva was one of the witnesses called to testify. Being the legend he was, he pled the fifth and wasn't afraid to call the hearing exactly what it was. Were you connected at any time with the Federal Theater Project in New York?
Yes, I was, and I was very proud to be. That was the advent of a magnificent period, and I think some of the greatest work that ever came out at that time. Truly a people's theater.
At that time, while you were a member of it, were you a member of the Communist Party?
Mr. Chairman, It seems to me that the most vital concern of this committee is to really control every concept of free thought throughout the country. To do it by attacking Hollywood and...
This committee is not interested in your opinion. Do you decline to answer the question, or will you answer it?
It is necessary that I answer it in my own way. It seems vital to say that the object of this committee is a smokescreen. Nobody either in Washington or Hollywood thinks there is a group in Hollywood dedicated to overthrow Southern California by force and violence.
And the familiar Broadway names just keep coming up in these Hollywood hearings. On January 14th, 1952, Elia Kazan, now a well-established and successful film director, named names from the group theater. And on May 20th, 1952, playwright Clifford Odets testified before the committee. Odets stated, "Of a total group theater membership of perhaps 35, there were 4 or 5 people who were connected to the Communist Party. Literature was passed around, and in a time of great social unrest, many people found themselves reaching out for new ideas, new ways of solving depressions or making a better life, fighting for one's rights, whatever those were.
What were those rights?
Those rights would be to have steady employment." In 1952, playwright Lillian Hellman was subpoenaed before HUAC, but on May 19th, 2 days before she was scheduled to appear, Hellman sent the committee a letter. She expressed her intention to plead the Fifth Amendment if summoned, stating, quote, "I cannot and will not cut my conscience to fit this year's fashions," end quote. Hellman was still called, though, and declined to answer any questions. Jerome Robbins, the legendary choreographer of On the Town, West Side Story, and Fiddler on the Roof, was called before HUAC in 1950. He managed to put it off for 3 years, but on May 5th, 1953, Robbins became a victim of the Lavender Scare, naming 8 names primarily so he wouldn't be outed as a homosexual. This made for a notorious butting of heads in 1964 when Robbins directed the blacklisted actor Zero Mostel in Fiddler on the Roof. In stark contrast to how the Screen Actors Guild reacted to the blacklisting scandal, Actors Equity took a strong stance against the HUAC witch hunts. On September 28, 1951, Equity passed a resolution, quote, declaring blacklisting of members of Actors Equity Association for color, race, religion, political beliefs, or union activity an unfair labor practice and a violation of our basic agreement, end quote. Blacklisted actors and writers might not be able to work in Hollywood anymore, but Equity ensured that they could find employment in New York City, thus perpetuating a safe atmosphere free from HUAC's influence. Thus, many of these familiar faces returned to the Big Apple after being blacklisted in La La Land. In fact, throughout the 1950s, there was a string of plays that confronted the social climate that HUAC trials engendered, becoming American classics in the process. Our old pal, Howard Da Silva, was not one to rest on his laurels, and upon his return to New York, he was set to co-produce and direct The World of Shalom Aleichem in 1953, featuring a cast of blacklisted actors like Phoebe Brand, Morris Karnofsky, and Ruby Dee, whose husband, Ossie Davis, was employed as the production's stage manager. Aleichem was a Yiddish author and playwright whose stories about Tevye the dairyman would go on to inspire the musical Fiddler on the Roof. 1952 would see a very successful revival of Lillian Hellman's 1934 play, The Children's Hour, about a pair of boarding school headmistresses accused of being in a lesbian affair. In 1955, the play Inherit the Wind hit Broadway, written by Jerome Laurence and Robert E. Lee. Not the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, the playwright. It told the story of the infamous 1925 Scopes monkey trial. The play's dramatizing of a trial meant to attack intellectual freedom was a direct allegory to the HUAC trials sweeping the nation. And speaking of direct allegories that fictionalize historical events, there was Arthur Miller's 1953 play, The Crucible. You know it, you read it in high school, all about the literal witch hunts during the Salem trials of the 1690s.
We just finished our high school performance of The Crucible.
And we didn't mess up at all.
The allegory here is obviously not subtle. In 1956, Miller was summoned before HUAC after being denied a passport and was directly asked about The Crucible. Are you cognizant of the fact that your play, The Crucible, with respect to the witch hunts in 1692, was the case history of a series of articles in the communist press drawing parallels to the investigations of communists and other subversives by congressional committees?
I think that was true in more than the communist press. I think it was true in the non-communist press, too. The comparison is inevitable, sir.
When Miller refused to name names, he was cited in contempt of Congress. Luckily, Miller's new girlfriend, Marilyn Monroe, paid an impromptu visit to the congressman and agreed to have a photo op. And just like that, Arthur Miller's contempt citation was gone and his passport was granted. Almost like the whole thing was just theater. The Red Scare simply didn't have the same hold over the Broadway community, it seemed. But the committee was emboldened, and in 1955, they were ready to attempt an attack on New York City. On August 15, 1955, 29 members of the New York City theater community were subpoenaed to appear before the House Un-American Activities Committee. In the month prior to the hearing, true to the tradition of professionals in theater, most of them got together to rehearse. Blacklisted writers Abraham Polonsky and Arnold Manoff directed the rehearsals, in a sense, as Polonsky particularly stressed that all of them play a character. In other words, just a heightened version of themselves. So actor Madeleine Lee Guilford cast herself as the ditzy blonde, Sarah Cunningham played the Southern Belle, and folk singer Pete Seeger even planned to bring his banjo to the hearing.
In other words, the Broadway community was ready to troll HUAC.
And that is exactly what they did. 23 witnesses appeared before HUAC, and 22 of them were unfriendly. The New York performing arts community absolutely did not have to rely on the Hollywood system for work, and they had been able to see for years the damage blacklisting hath wrought. Questions circulated around the work produced by the Federal Theater Project and the Group Theater, just as they had in the Hollywood trials, as well as attacking any union affiliations. Actor Martin Wolfson, after being asked if he was a member of the Communist Party, responded bluntly, "I think that the purpose of this committee is to throw fear into the theater. I think that it is no accident you come here at this time, just when productions are being planned for the fall, actors are being engaged, and plays are being read. You are trying to throw fear into the theater, and I don't think the purpose is a correct one or valid." Madeleine Lee Guilford was most likely the straw that broke the camel's back, as she played her role only too well, answering every question with a question, going on rambling tangents, invoking the First, Fourth, Eighth, and Fifth Amendments, and riling up the committee members. Her testimony ended with a mic drop.
I doubt that it would be of any value to question this witness further. She has indicated she is not going to answer any questions relating to the matter of communism.
I am perfectly willing to answer all of your questions about subversive and infiltration in the entertainment industry. And the answer is that there is none.
My mic.
Pete Seeger, true to his folksy style, when asked about whether he had performed at communist functions, responded in a most poetic manner.
I have sung for Americans of every political persuasion, and I am proud that I never refused to sing to any audience, no matter what religion or color of their skin or situations of life. I have sung in hobo jungles, and I have sung for the Rockefellers, and I am proud that I have never refused to sing for anybody. That is the only answer I can give along that line.
And it was Pete Seeger who would play his banjo on the courthouse steps when his hearing had concluded. The committee had scheduled 5 days worth of hearings, but they ended after 4, some witnesses completely unseen. It was clear that Broadway was having none of their nonsense, and HUAC would have to perpetuate their witch hunts somewhere else. And for some reason, just as the relevance of the House Un-American Activities Committee was waning, they attempted to blacklist Broadway again in 1958. These hearings were even more of an afterthought, but still 19 witnesses were called and 18 were uncooperative. The most notable witness of this group was Joseph Papp, founder and director of the New York Shakespeare Festival, and who would go on to establish the Public Theater in 1967. Just like Hallie Flanagan, Papp had some sublime zingers that showed just how ignorant the committee was about theater. When asked about whether he infuses communist propaganda into his work, Papp responded,
"Sir, the plays we do are Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare said, 'To thine own self be true,' and various other lines from Shakespeare can hardly be said to be subversive or influencing minds. I cannot control the writing of Shakespeare. He wrote plays 500 years ago.
My point is, do you intentionally control the operation of the entertainment you produce or supervise for the purpose of influencing sympathy towards communism? That is my point.
The answer to that is obviously no. The plays speak for themselves.
And with that little blip, the attempted blacklisting of Broadway came to an end. So, why didn't the Red Scare work on the Broadway community when it worked so terrifyingly well in Hollywood? Well, as Bernard Gersten, Joe Papp's former associate and longtime managing director of Lincoln Center, put it, quote, "If I had to say it in one word, I'd say no advertisers." Red channels worked because television, especially in the 1950s, relied on commercials, and ad men dictated casting in the end. There's also the mentality that the Broadway audiences were more sophisticated and not afraid to be challenged by new ideas. In other words, the Broadway community during the Cold War was unfazed by free thought and unencumbered by the demands of the commercial corporate world. No comment. Just this show has some good puppetry.
Oh, thank you.
It's Disney. You like Disney.
I do like Disney.
And, guess I'll just go with Wicked, because, that movie is never coming out, Universal. I think Ariana Grande would be okay.
Oh, I love her.
So, Broadway is officially coming back in September of 2021. Might be a good time for a Cradle Will Rock revival, eh, Gerald?
And when the wind blows,
And when the wind blows, the cradle will rock.
Ronald Reagan, the actor?